For many decades, the Pentagon has bought most of its equipment from 5 big defense contractors: Lockheed Martin, RTX, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, and General Dynamics. Is that all about to change? Welcome to the Chicago Booth Review podcast, where we bring you groundbreaking insights in a clear and straightforward way. I'm Hal Weitzman, and today I'm talking with Chicago Booth's Mark Canez about how Anduril, a tech startup, is threatening to disrupt the defense industry. Could it ultimately lead to cheaper and more effective systems for the military? Mark Canez, welcome back to the Chicago Booth Review podcast.
Great to be back.
Now listen, last time you were here, we talked about your fascination with disruption and innovation, how industries are kind of torn apart and put back together again. And last time we talked about software as a service. This time we're going to talk about defense and how the defense industry in the United States is being completely transformed, maybe at the early days of that.
Very early days.
Yeah, and it starts with a company, a challenger called Anduril. Tell us about Anduril. What's the point behind Anduril? What are they trying to achieve?
Sure. It's let me sort of just give a brief, quick little history and then talk about Anduril. So Anduril is a startup that emerged a number of years ago to provide an innovative approach to border surveillance in a context where you're talking about surveillance on the southern border, the U.S.-Mexico border. Right? Yeah. So you've got all these different, do we build a wall? Do we just have surveillance? So you've got humans in the loop that are using technology that's helping them identify what's happening at the border, then they respond, that sort of thing, versus building a wall. So this debate challenge has been going on for years. It's not just in a more recent time. So for the longest time, the DoD, et cetera, have been looking for solutions for border surveillance. Okay, because the alternative to technology is you actually have border agents on the border, with binoculars, trying to see what's going on, right? And that's historically what we've done. Given the significant surveillance capabilities that exist within the DoD in sort of more of a sort of battlefield kind of context, the idea was to bring some of those capabilities and apply them to the border. So they attempted that with a large defense contract that Boeing won, and they tried to develop a solution, but they ultimately developed a solution that was based on classic, somewhat sort of outdated from a commercial perspective approaches to how you would do border surveillance. Okay, and what that meant was they created a solution that didn't really leverage modern technology the way they should have. It was a bespoke system that required lots of expensive technology, and ultimately at the end of the day there was extreme cost overruns, and to make matters worse, it didn't work very well.
Sounds like classic defense contract.
Yeah, in the extreme.
Outdated, doesn't work.
As somebody who spends quite a bit of time in the industry, I'm not going to bash the industry too much. So,
as a taxpayer, that's my perspective.
Okay, well, fair enough. But there's, you're alive, you're safe.
That's true.
Take that in mind. So this was a huge pain point, if you like, in sort of search for a solution. The way the defense contracting tends to work, it's not set up for, let's have somebody come in here and provide a really low-cost solution that is based on sort of minimal technology that is good enough. So you think that was kind of the setting for a while. That there was the way that the contracting works within the DoD, et cetera, is it doesn't lend itself to that. So what happened was Palmer Luckey and a few of his fellow founders, Palmer Luckey invented Oculus, et cetera, and had an interest in the defense industry, et cetera. He's quite a character. He and his team saw an opportunity and had been working on this, and given his experience with the Oculus, et cetera, saw an opportunity here. And so what they generated was a very low-cost solution, which was a platform, software platform called Lattice. And what Lattice does is it takes in sensor data and image data from low-cost towers. Because even what Boeing was doing, but Boeing was putting up these big, expensive towers around the border that then would gather image data, etc. And then that data would go to a central control office, and that humans in that office would see images, and they would have to kind of integrate this data to try to figure out what was going on and then take action. Called command and control. That's where the story's going, is command and control, C2. What Anduril did was they created the Lattice platform, which is a mixture of combination of being able to pull this data in real time off these low-cost platforms that they can just move around. It's really inexpensive to place one of these towers somewhere. So the towers collect the data wirelessly, of course, goes into the cloud, goes into their platform. It gets ingested, as we say, and with the use of AI, it gets processed. So it knows whether or not, is that a cow or is that a human being? And it does it like that. We don't have a human looking at an image trying to figure out, is that a cow or is that a human being? The AI does it. It does it very quickly. And not only is it providing that kind of information in real time, it's also providing recommendations on what action should be taken. A human ultimately decides, but what it's saying, this is what's happening here. You probably need to deploy these patrol agents over here. It looks like it's heading west in this direction, so you need to get to this point. It's giving sort of suggestions, recommendations on what to do in real time. So it's command and control, which command and control is taking data in real time, disparate data of all different kinds of forms, processing that data into information, valuable information, to support decision making. So that's command and control. Super important in the defense industry. It exists across the board. So the Lattice platform is providing the basis for that. So they come in with this low-cost solution for doing this, and it's a subscription model. Back to our favorite thing. It's a subscription model. So it's not, they develop it, they didn't get the contract to develop it. They developed it, because usually for the DoD, you get a contract, then you go develop it, right? You might have a prototype that proves it out, but at the end of the day, the cost you incurred, when you actually develop the solution, you know you're going to get paid. As a commercial player coming in, Anduril's coming in and developing the solution, and then saying, okay, we can put all these towers down, use Lattice, and you start paying a subscription. That's antithetical to what happens in the DoD. DoD sort of flips that model on its head, which is, we have a big, massive contract. You prove that you can deliver on it, and then we start paying on it. And then as you start going to production, you're going to get paid. And then it's cost plus.
So if this commercial player was, as you say, that came with a background in tech and other types of tech, came in and was able to do this, why wasn't Boeing or other defense contractors, massive, companies that have access to all sorts of technology and could have bought this kind of solution, why didn't they come up with it?
I've spent the last 20 years working with a large defense contractor through a relationship with the school. So an executive education program. And I help them with strategy. I teach them strategy, and they do strategy. They work on strategies for their company when I'm with them here in Chicago. And I have experienced over these many years working with really smart people that they recognize that there's alternative ways to do these things, but the way the economics of a large defense contractor is completely dependent on this model in which you get the big contract, you're going to get paid, it's cost plus. And there's massive risk associated with these things, and they don't want to take on the risk. So the government is taking on a big portion of the risk in terms of, we're going to go build this factory to build this product, or this, whatever the payload is, or whatever it is that we are producing. It might be some complex sensor, many different types of things. It may be artillery, but the point is, there's a contract, we're going to get paid, and it's just about cost and cost plus. And the whole economics of a prime defense country's business is dependent upon that. To move to something that's low-cost subscription model just doesn't fall within the economics of their business, right? And so even though there's people within perhaps within the DoD, within the primes, that understand there are alternative, perhaps better ways of doing this, the contracting vehicles essentially haven't existed to support that kind of work. Now, they've started to emerge over time. The reason why Anduril is, quote, and Palantir's in there too, but that's a whole other story. that they basically showed up and say, this works, you have a problem, you can ignore us if you want, but if you're willing to pay the subscription, which is a lot less than you were ever going to pay, then we'll give you the solution. So it's kind of like, here it is, here's the solution. Well, that's not the defense contractors don't work that way. They don't show up with the solution and say, do you want it? Right? That's in the commercial world, that's what you have to do, but that's not the way the DoD operates. And so it's not that the people weren't smart enough, although the people at Anduril are really smart, don't get me wrong, but it's that it's just not their business model, right? And their business model isn't a business model they select. It's a business model that's been forced upon them over the years by the DoD. So the DoD and the policies that have been set in place for the last 20, 30, 40 years have created this sort of challenge. Okay.
Mark, in the first half we talked about what's happening in the defense industry, and you introduced to us Anduril and how they're turning a lot of things on their head, introducing a subscription model, low cost, on time, developing the product before the Pentagon asks for bids and everything else, and then presenting it and saying, we can give this to you, and how it is a big challenge. You talked about surveillance, border surveillance. What other areas of the defense industry could this affect?
Well, it turns out...
Are we going to have some weapons on subscription?
Not weapons on subscription. No, I don't think that you won't have that. But the second part of the story gets to that question, which is Anduril's, the border surveillance is a very small market, right? So the big market is all command and control needs across the DoD. So it's
which just reminds. So that means anywhere there's a lot of data coming in, you have to make quick decisions.
Yes. Right. And you, in some sense,
which sounds like everywhere if
yes.
you're in the military.
Yeah, that's right. So in some sense, border surveillance is kind of a relatively benign context for C2. I'm going to use the term C2, command and control. So it's just in terms of the level of risk, et cetera. In the context of the battlefield, which could be in the air, on the sea, right, and of course on the ground, and all three at once in the extreme, C2 is fundamental, command and control, right? So you have lots of information coming in from very disparate sources. Much of the information is coming, we call it on the edge, off of actual physical platforms. Physical, it could be a submarine, it could be drones up in the air, it could be all kinds of things. And that information is coming in, and then that information needs to be assembled and put to work for decision-making purposes. So that's the way C2 works. And the solution to that, to the C2 problem, which is how archaic C2 has been within the DoD. Why has it been archaic? Because when the DoD procures a platform, or a platform is any sort of, it could be a new type of tank, it could be some kind of underwater, like a submarine, anything physical, right? That, I'm going to call it a platform because that's what they call in the DoD. But when I say platform in this context, it's something you can stand on. It's physical. That is a bespoke system that a prime contractor designs and gets built. It has its own internal, if you like, say, call it an operating system, right? So the software is integrated into that hardware. It's not part of some more open system. So it has its own defined interfaces that are optimized, they think, for that piece of hardware. So when the sensor data is coming off all of these platforms, it's not coming together in a way that easily meshes, right? That easily can be ingested and then put to work. And in fact, many times it's not possible to do it. So you actually have a human. You'll see these pictures of, individuals that are in the military looking at screens, oftentimes green screens, and they're looking at these screens, and there's a screen over here for some information coming in, a screen over here, and there's a human taking that information, putting it in their brain, and then doing something with it, right? It's the sort of thing that I couldn't even believe when I heard this was going on some 10 years ago, because C2 solutions have been something I've seen teams develop. It's like, this is crazy. Lattice solves that problem. So what Lattice does is it's providing, not only is it bringing that information into a common platform where it's formatted in a common way, but then it's instantaneously putting that data to work with AI. right? And this is all about mostly autonomous systems. So the C2 capability that they built with Lattice for border surveillance has just got expanded and can be now used in many, many different other contexts, where now we have, in an actual battlefield or battlefield context, we have all this information coming in. And we have a C2 platform called Lattice, which integrates much more quickly and is much smarter. It provides much better C2. That's part one of the story. And again, big question. Well, what the heck why didn't somebody in the DoD get this developed? That's a whole nother storyline. Part two is Anduril has this thing, but they can't sell it to the DoD. Why? Because the DoD doesn't know how to buy software. If I can't stand on it, if there's not a cost associated with it, I don't know why am I paying for this thing, right? Because every new use case for Lattice costs essentially zero. It's software, right? So Anduril found itself in this situation where they kind of had to replicate what they did with this border surveillance, where they had to go out and buy their own towers, the hardware, and integrate it in with Lattice and provide a complete solution. Because now the DoD can look at that and put a price tag on that, right? So that's led Anduril down the path of and this gets to what's going to be the optimal business model in the future, right? Has led them to have to backward integrate into the hardware. So they're making their own UAVs, right? And they're looking to innovate the way they make the UAVs. They're doing a lot, trying to be kind of the sort of Elon Musk of defense manufacturing and running into problems. But the point is, they are then finding themselves having to deliver complete UAV solutions. But if you have 10 different use cases, a UAV that's a submarine, a UAV that's flying around in the sky doing surveillance, they both integrate into Lattice. And that integration, because we build both of these, and they've got about 10 different things they're building. We build both of these, we optimize it to work well with Lattice, then the complete solution is even better, according to them. Okay, but now we go from being really a software company that went out and bought off-the-shelf components, these towers, to now we're having to build very complex hardware platforms, right? And that's kind of where Anduril is at right now. So the bigger question is, to what extent is this going to disrupt? The defense primes are not going anywhere. It's just hard to even conceive of all the things that our prime contractors, large defense prime contractors.
But these large defense companies have been in place. There's really big giants, right? They've been in place for decades.
For decades.
So this is the first time that we've really had a glimpse that system might be disrupted.
It's the disruption is the following. There's one other storyline about this company, General Atomics. It's somewhat of a disruptor in the UAV space, but the reason why we want to distinguish between an industry being disrupted in terms of the way it operates, the economics of the way they operate, et cetera, and then whether or not the incumbents in that industry will get disrupted as this industry disruption occurs. So what's the disruptive forces now are the DoD is waking up. I shouldn't say waking up to. They are now have bought into. We don't know if Anduril is going to be the solution, but we know the Anduril platform, what Anduril's developing, that is the solution for the future. We need lots of modularity in the products that we produce. This idea that we buy these big integrated systems that can't talk to one another, and when you want to update them, you have to come up with a whole new program, which is super expensive. Anduril's coming and saying, no, this needs to be modular. So if you want to update it, it's much easier to improve these physical hardware platforms through modularity, and we can produce them more cheaply. They haven't proven this yet, but that's the theory. And so what's going to get disrupted over time is the DoD insisting on we have our hardware can connect with one another very easily through these software platforms, and we want much more agility on the production side of the hardware, because this is too expensive and too slow. And under the current administration, which has been a big benefit to Anduril. Anduril's kind of the poster child for we want to see more of what Anduril's doing. And the defense contractors are right now where we're at in this interesting time, which is defense contractors say, oh, yeah, they've done all the other stuff, but wait until they have to produce something at scale. And that's where we're at this sort of a little inflection point for Anduril. I think they'll probably get there, but at the same time...
There's been some press, isn't there, that sort of some media that's been skeptical about their ability to do that. But I wanted to ask you, just to finish up, I mean, does all this mean we're going to have... We were joking at the beginning about defense contracts always run too long, too expensive, and then they don't work. Are we going to actually have cheaper defense solutions?
It's a big array of solutions. So I think that there's going to be a large portion of what the DoD procures, which will include lots of hardware. Software defined is going to be the new thing. Software defined systems that connect with one another, more commoditized hardware, right? We don't need these exquisite systems. And so that's going to be the push. There's going to be a lot more of it. The defense budget's going to go up no matter who's going to be. It's going to go up given what's going on in the world. And efficiency will be higher, right? And the challenges, the infrastructure of the DoD and the primes is defined a particular way. They're trying to adjust. Wartime needs are changing, asymmetric warfare, etc. What we've learned from what's going on in Ukraine, what Ukraine has done, and what we're experiencing in Iran, that is shifting priorities. The ability of the DoD and the primes to sort of keep up with that is going to be tested, right? And I think they ultimately will. I have a lot of affection for the people that I struggle with this in the prime contract. They're very mission driven, but it's a matter of a lot of old routines, contracting practices, etc., are going to have to get relaxed in order for this to happen.
Right.
But it takes back to when I said in my part one, economics always wins, no matter how long it's taking. It's taking a long time in the DoD, and that's why I go back to my earlier orientation. That's why one of the reasons I study this is because if it can happen in the DoD, it can happen anywhere. So I think it will happen.
Okay. All right. Well, Mark, thank you so much for coming back on the Chicago Booth Review podcast to talk about disruption in the defense industry.
Thank you.